flattering reception with which I am honored by the citizens of all the towns I have visited to this date excite the most lively feelings of gratitude in me.
I'd like to read a proclamation. The Proclamation Office of the Mayor, Municipality of Princeton. The proclamation of the bicentennial of the Lafayette Farewell Tour, 1824 to 1825. Whereas the American Friends of Lafayette is celebrating the bicentennial of Lafayette's Farewell Tour of America in 2024 to 2025 in hundreds of cities and towns, including Princeton, New Jersey. And whereas this celebration honors the visit to America of the last of the surviving major generals of the American Revolution at the request of President James Monroe to remind Americans of their shared founding values. And now, therefore, on behalf of Mark Frieda, Mayor of Municipality of Princeton, and the Council of Princeton, County of Mercer, State of New Jersey, do hereby proclaim September 25th, 2024, the bicentennial of Lafayette's visit to be Lafayette Day in Princeton, and be it further resolved that Princeton's Mayor and Council express appreciation to the American Friends of Lafayette for organizing commemoration activities, including this free public lecture in Princeton on the bicentennial of Lafayette to Princeton, given under the seal and hand this 25th day of September. Mark Frieda, Mayor. Thank you.
Marie-Joseph, Paul, Yves, Roche, Gilbert de Montier de Lafayette, we know him as the Marquis de Lafayette, had been touring the United States for more than a month by the time he reached Princeton 200 years ago today. Visiting the United States at the invitation of the President James Monroe and of Congress, and starting in Manhattan, he had traversed lower New England, stopped off in Lexington and Concord as well as Boston, returned to New York, headed north on the Hudson, circled back to New York again before heading south, stopping briefly here in Princeton, to Washington, then Virginia, then west, visiting all 24 states of the Union. A tour that was originally planned for 3 months that stretched out for more than a year. Everywhere, aged, surviving notables of the Revolution, backed by enormous crowds, 90,000, everywhere there were these enormous crowds of younger Americans greeted him joyously. Vignettes about the progress of the hero, who was hailed as the nation's guest, abound, connecting him with America's future as well as America's past. Lafayette and his entourage visited the greatest American military hero of a later war with the British, the War of 1812, who is now a defeated candidate for the American presidency, Andrew Jackson. After conducting a tour of what was to Lafayette's secretary in attendance, Auguste Levasseur, a surprisingly modest estate, Jackson, bid by his neighbors, proudly displayed the official honors he had been awarded in recognition of his victory at the fateful Battle of New Orleans, a pair of pistols. You will remember this, of course. Jackson asked his guest if he recognized those pistols. Lafayette looked at them for a while, a few minutes examination, exclaimed, "Yes! They were the very pistols that he himself had presented to his own personal hero, George Washington, at the height of the Revolutionary War in 1778. Decades later, in Camden, New Jersey, an aged writer recalled meeting Lafayette when the great man visited Brooklyn, New York, on Independence Day, July 4th, 1825. Considering the occasion, the old man recalled the celebration was, quote, quite informal and old-fashioned, without the crowds and blare and ceremony of the present day, but with men and women lining the 2-mile route from Fulton Ferry to a building site where Lafayette laid the cornerstone for what would become the Brooklyn Apprentices Library. In a scene that was, the old man later recalled, curiously magnetic and quiet, Lafayette was, quote, evidently deeply pleased and affected when at the construction site he noticed a 6-year-old boy whom he picked up, held to his chest, kissed on the cheek, and placed in a safer spot. The old witness who told that story was that boy, grown to be the poet Walt Whitman. And of course, here in Princeton, there was a splendid scene where the college refectory, the mess hall, the lunchroom, dinner room, was gaily decked out to the point where it was barely recognizable for a morning breakfast, which we should be eating right now. Followed by Lafayette's official receiving outside of Nassau Hall of the honorary degree of Doctor of Laws that had been extended to him in absentia in 1790 under the aegis of the college president, John Witherspoon. Now, as we're seeing more and more of historical Princeton of the Revolution disappearing, destroyed really by unenlightened, profit-driven development, it can be hard to envisage that scene and what Lafayette's entry and departure down the old King's Highway might have looked like. But stand before Nassau Hall and squint just hard enough, and something of the festivities might just come to the imagination. These scenes, and thanks largely to Auguste Levasseur, who wrote about them all, we can read about scores of them. They strike today as they struck then the dominant chord of Lafayette's triumphal tour that we honor this morning, and with the political principles and military glory that he represented. Although he was French, Lafayette was truly a singular American figure. All of the other outstanding military patriot figures who had been born 20 years and more before Lafayette, he came when he was 19 years old, they were all gone. And even when they were alive, none could come as close as Lafayette did to matching in glory, political and military, the departed American demigod, George Washington. In fact, Lafayette may have been the only figure on earth who could have evoked such universal affection among the American people in 1824. For, as has been said, the United States was badly divided, politically and socially, in 1824, in ways that, though not identical, call to mind other moments of intense division, including our own. An older generation of political leaders with experience of the Revolution and united under the aegis of the Jeffersonian Republican Party was passing away as a new generation jockeyed for power. In 1824, no fewer than 5 candidates representing distinct sectional as well as ideological interests would vie for the presidency, with the 4 surviving candidates going into the general election in a fractious contest that had to be decided, and let's hope this is not a repeat, that had to be decided with intense controversy by the House of Representatives. Beneath that fragmentation, though, meanwhile, 2 great crises, both surfacing in 1819 but with lasting political consequences, had gripped the nation. First, a financial crisis worsened by flagrant mismanagement by the Second Bank of the United States, it's more like 2008 than anything else, had led to the first truly national economic depression. Second, and more pertinent to Lafayette's visit, 1819 also brought the first great national struggle over the future of American slavery, in the prolonged fight over the admission of Missouri to the Union with or without slavery. To be sure, slavery had been an issue in national affairs since the framers reached their famous compromises at the Federal Convention in Philadelphia in 1787. But with the advent of the cotton gin and the renaissance of plantation slavery, with the so-called Cotton Revolution at the turn of the 19th century, hopes outside of the Lower South that slavery was a doomed institution fitfully collapsed. Pro-slavery forces became ever more aggressive in seeking to expand slavery geographically and thus expand its power politically. Anti-slavery sentiment, which had been growing since 1815, soared in the North. And even after the settlement of the so-called Missouri Compromise in 1820-21, slavery and anti-slavery remained live issues, as anti-slavery advocates, including a new generation of Northern free black abolitionists, tried to build on the anti-slavery momentum that came out of the Missouri crisis. And it's here, on the matter of slavery and anti-slavery, where Lafayette's visit, I think, fits in most clearly. More than all of the major figures of the revolutionary cause, far more than Washington, or Jefferson, or Madison, slaveholders all, or even John Adams, far more than all of them, Lafayette was the hero of both of the 2 great revolutions that began to shake the Atlantic world in the last third of the 18th century. The revolution against the old regime of monarchy, aristocracy, and superstition, and the revolution against slavery. And no figure, no prominent figure at any rate, of his time in the entire Atlantic world upheld both of these revolutions and twined them both with greater fervor than the Marquis de Lafayette. Although organized anti-slavery politics actually originated in the American colonies on the eve of the Revolution, Lafayette had lost little time in becoming an active as well as an ardent abolitionist. Exactly when and under what circumstances he took up the cause is unclear, although he was likely influenced by his young friend, the South Carolinian John Laurens, who proposed vainly a major plan to offer freedom to all enslaved men who were willing to enlist in the American cause. Lafayette also became friendly with an enslaved man, your friend, James Armstead, who actually did end up in the American Army. His influence famously helped convince Washington eventually to arrange for the emancipation of his own slaves in his will. In 1788, a year before the outbreak of the French Revolution, Lafayette joined the newly formed Société des Amis des Noirs, whose agitation contributed to the abolition of slavery in all of the French colonies by the National Convention in 1794. In 1786, Lafayette wrote the following to his friend, John Adams, quote, "In the cause of my black brethren, I feel myself warmly interested and most decidedly against the white part of mankind. Whatever be the complexion of the enslaved, it does not, in my opinion, alter the complexion of the crime which the enslaver commits, a crime much blacker than any African face." He's also reputed to have said later that he would never have picked up his sword in support of the American Revolution had he thought it was going to lead to the creation of a slaveholding nation. So, to the tour, because Lafayette's abolitionism played a significant, if sometimes forgotten, role in the 1824 tour that we're celebrating today. In northern cities, abolitionists took Lafayette's presence as an opportunity to try and join the anti-slavery revolution to the Republican Revolution, which Lafayette gladly approved of. In New York, the local abolition organization, the New York Manumission Society, announced that it had unanimously elected Lafayette as one of their members, along with the eminent British abolitionists, two eminent British abolitionists and a couple of friends of Lafayette's, Granville Sharp and Thomas Clarkson. Here was the rub. How could the principles of the American Revolution, the principles of freedom, glory, and truth, for which Lafayette was being honored, how could they be honestly upheld by Americans who enslaved other people? That was the fundamental question that would lead to the Civil War. But here, more than a third of a century before the slaveholders' rebellion began at Fort Sumter, Lafayette's brief presence brought the question to a head. With his Virginia friends in particular, Levasseur wrote that Lafayette, quote, "never missed an opportunity to defend the right which all men without exception," that's in italics, "have to liberty," and broached among the friends of Mr. Madison, for example, the question of slavery, and it was approached and discussed by them frankly. Lafayette was more circumspect further south, especially in South Carolina, where Levasseur related with dismay high public officials were required to be slaveholders, as well as in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, where slavery had a much tighter grip. Yet, if in the name of national unity, in the name of his tour, he mainly kept to himself, Lafayette was sorely discomfited by the contradiction, as Levasseur described at length. He was shocked at what had become of the America that he had fought for during the Revolution. Through it all, Lafayette clung to an older optimism that, in the end, America's highest ideals would prevail and slaveholders would come to see the errors of their ways and find some means to rid themselves of the institution. Lafayette took special pleasure in meeting Illinois' abolitionist governor, a man named Edward Coles, born in Virginia, a protege of both Jefferson and Madison, who had moved west, freed his own inherited enslaved men and women, and fought a fierce and ultimately successful fight to prevent powerful pro-slavery forces from turning Illinois, like Missouri, formally into a slaveholding state. The transitional figure Lafayette, a man who bridged two generations, could not fully comprehend what historians have called the rise of a second slavery, based in this country on cotton production and how it was creating a slaveholding South that had already begun to justify slavery as perfectly in keeping with Republican principles, even if it meant modifying, if not rejecting outright, the egalitarian principles embodied in the opening lines of the slaveholder Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. But their successes would come not because, as Lafayette expected, ideals overcame private interest, but as the outcome of a horrific war, which would cost, historians now estimate, 750,000 military dead. What is worth remembering about him, though, and about his 1824 tour, is how important he was in understanding how the revolutionary principles of 1776 demanded slavery's abolition. Lafayette's tour in 1824 was, in large measure, a nostalgic affair. And Lafayette himself had not completely understood how much the revolutionary America he had fought for and then idealized had changed, above all the respect to the institution of slavery. Although by the time he left, he had a pretty good idea of what had happened. Yet if he looked backward, he and his supporters looked backward, Lafayette also looked ahead to a day when slavery and racial oppression would be eradicated. As we honor Lafayette, the great hero of the American Revolution, today, so too should we honor Lafayette the abolitionist, who fought slavery as a monstrous crime and who went to his grave proclaiming the proposition that all humanity, without exception, is entitled to freedom and equality.
Madame Councilwoman, Monsieur le Directeur, Monsieur le Professeur, distinguished guests, Mesdames et Messieurs, accept my thanks for the kind welcome you have offered me in the name of the inhabitants of Princeton. While the name of this city recalls important military remembrance, it is also connected with that of the illustrious college, which in diffusing knowledge and liberal sentiments has greatly contributed to turn those successes to the advantage of public liberty. Your library during the Revolution had been destroyed, but your principles were printed in the hearts of the American people. The kind and flattering reception with which I am honored by the citizens of all the towns I have visited to this date excite the most lively feelings of gratitude in me. The United States are the first nation on the record of history who have founded their Constitution upon an honest investigation and clear definition of their natural and social rights. Nor can we doubt but that notwithstanding the combinations made elsewhere by despotism against the sacred rights of mankind, immense majorities in other countries will not in vain observe the happiness and prosperity of a free, virtuous, and enlightened people. Unfortunately, now, in 1824, rather than political harmony, factions have arisen within your political parties that threaten not just the parties themselves, but this national purpose and unity. Regardless of the victor, may your upcoming presidential elections in October ensure the liberty and freedoms that the blood of those of us who won them 50 years ago was not shed in vain. The struggle for freedom by the patriotic citizens of America towards the close of the last century was successful and has proved most auspicious to human happiness. Americans are and should be uncompromisingly proud of their republic, its liberties, its growth in population, wealth and prestige. Your faith in constitutional freedom is unfounded, and you rightfully believe that it must prevail throughout the world. I share this belief. Moreover, we have reason to hope that the blessings of this freedom will not be confined to this Western continent. In conclusion, it is the pride of my heart to see this nation once more and to have been one of the earliest adopted sons of America. Je vous remercie de votre attention. Merci beaucoup.
My name is Chuck Schwam. I'm the Executive Director of the American Friends of Lafayette. And yes, it all started right here in New Jersey on August 14th. The American Friends of Lafayette were born in 1932 at Lafayette College. We have 1,500 members across the country, and we're following him around for 13 months. You know, he was only supposed to stay for 3 months, but everybody wanted a piece of Lafayette. He traveled 6,000 miles. We estimate he saw about 4 million people. Lafayette was a wonderful, swashbuckling young general, and that's all we know. He came over at 19 years old. But we want to talk about the Franco-American alliance, how important that is, how Lafayette was the genesis of that, our oldest ally. If it wasn't for the French, their guns, their ships, their money, their military personnel, we would have never won that war. History is important too, because we kind of keep making the same mistakes over and over again in this world. The election time in 1824 was very tough. Our country was divided. People were against each other, either on one side or the other. And look where we are now. So history is important. He was doing things in the United States that nobody ever saw, treating Native Americans and slaves like normal human beings, treating women like equals. And this was very important that Americans saw that. And this man brought it to our shores. And I really, really appreciate the fact that we're accentuating that as we travel around with the general. So that's all I wanted to say. If you're interested in learning more of where we're going, all 400 days, I used to have black hair, go to Lafayette200.org, Lafayette200.org. Thank you again, Brad, for having me. Viva Lafayette!
Good afternoon. On behalf of the American Friends of Lafayette, I'm delighted to welcome you to this commemoration of an event that happened in this building exactly 200 years ago, almost to the hour.
It is my honor to give the remarks offered 200 years ago by Mayor Robert McNeely on this day, in this building, on the occasion of your visit to the city of Trenton in 1824. And who fought at Brandywine, at Mammoth, and at Yorktown to procure for Americans those blessings you now see them so fully and we trust so gratefully enjoy. The aged veteran who partook with you the fatigues and dangers of the camp, the march and the battle, hails your return to the land of your youthful exploits with sentiments of fraternal love. We hope before you leave our city, you will visit the painting by N.C. Wyeth in the lobby of the Thomas Edison State University. The painting shows our beloved Washington passing beneath a civic arch built to honor him as he traveled through Trenton to be inaugurated our first president in New York. 35 years later, you would pass beneath the same arch during your grand farewell tour. Sir, we welcome you back to Trenton.
Nothing can be more gratifying to my feelings than the testimonies I receive of my living still in the hearts of the people of New Jersey. And I beg you, Madam, to be pleased to accept and transmit to the citizens of this state the cordial tribute of my grateful, constant, and affectionate respect. The whole line of country through which we have passed during these last 2 days is commonly called the Garden of the United States. This name agrees admirably with this fertile part of New Jersey, which is watered by numerous streams and adorned with the most beautiful plantations. The emotions of love and gratitude which I have been accustomed to feel on my entering your city have ever mingled with a sense of religious reverence for my return to this nation. Since my last visit to Trenton, I am now most agreeably surprised at the great and astonishing changes since made. In this place, Madame, and in parts of the state still more exposed during our revolutionary contest, I have had continued opportunities to admire the fortitude with which the citizens of New Jersey encountered the dangers of their situation. Now, it is my happy lot to witness the political and social blessings of your popular institutions, and I am most kindly welcomed by the new generations. It remains only for me to offer to you, Madame, to the corporation, and to the citizens of Trenton the acknowledgments of a grateful and affectionate heart. Merci.
So I'm delighted to participate in this commemoration of the Marquis de Lafayette and his long, impactful dedication to the newly born United States of America. Clearly, he embodied many of the qualities that we continue to admire: courage, dedication, passion, and self-sacrifice. So I'm delighted once again to salute the Marquis de Lafayette and his long service to our nation. And I invite all of you to journey with us as we prepare to mark the nation's 250th birthday in 2026.
So I want to read a proclamation on behalf of Mayor Reed Goussior. It's entitled The Bicentennial of the Lafayette Farewell Tour, 1824-1825. Whereas the American Friends of Lafayette is celebrating the bicentennial of Lafayette's Farewell Tour of America in years 2024 to 2025 in hundreds of cities and towns, whereas Lafayette was an early and consistent voice against slavery in France and in America, where he constantly sought to persuade American friends, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, to eradicate this evil. And whereas Lafayette supported women's rights in matters of education and divorce, he was received by the Trenton mayor in this state house and passed under the arch originally built for George Washington when he passed through Trenton on his way to be inaugurated in New York City. Now, therefore, I, on behalf of W. Reed Goussior, Mayor of the City of Trenton, declare September 25th, 2024, the bicentennial of Lafayette's visit to be Lafayette Day in Trenton, New Jersey.
So we are honored with the task, the daunting task, but the wonderful task of following Lafayette's footsteps around the country for the next, at this point, I guess, for 350 days. It's been wonderful so far. We're 5 weeks in. It all started in New Jersey as we celebrated Lafayette being off the coast of Sandy Hook on August 14th, exactly the day he did so 200 years later. He was only supposed to stay for 3 months, and he ended up staying for 13 months, and that's where 2025 comes in. St. Louis, New Orleans, Portland, Maine, Cincinnati, Ohio, Natchez, Alabama, Georgia. It's amazing how far he went. We're having trouble keeping up with Lafayette, and he was in a horse and carriage. So if you want to learn more about where we'll be and what we're doing, go to Lafayette200.org. That's our bicentennial website, and we'd love to have you visit us along the way and be with us celebrating the General's bicentennial.